Good to be here.
Making a brilliant presentation, and I really mean that. That was very provocative, and I'll be thinking about that for a very long time.
Good, thanks.
As you know, I mentioned that this interview is part of SCAR, as we now are, effort to have a celebration of our first 30 years. And part of that celebration is talking to our former directors, all of them, of which you are one.
Right.
And before you rush back to Otago, Dunedin.
Otago.
Otago.
Put the emphasis on the second syllable.
There you go. I got it now. We thought we'd grab you and ask you merely 3 questions. The first question is, when you arrived at then ICAR, what in your mind was the status of our organization? What did you find here?
Well, first of all, I found that you were the first program that actually had got up the ranks and had offered a master's and a PhD in conflict analysis and conflict resolution, and that was, I think that was a very distinctive element of ICAR's sort of identity at that time, that you were the kind of first off the ranks. Secondly, it was a sort of immediate post-Burtonian period, and John had just finished his 3-volume opus on human needs theory, and so I think human needs theory was certainly at the top of everybody's thinking at that stage. It was also, I think, kind of identified as one of the leading centers in relation to analytical and collaborative problem solving. With John's influence, your influence, Chris's influence. And that, I think, made a big impression. I arrived just after the heyday of the conflict resolution clinic.
With Jim Lowy.
With Jim Lowy.
Yeah.
I replaced Jim Lowy. And the clinic was to some extent going through some reorganization as different kinds of contracts and so forth dried up. But I remember after arriving here from the ANU, I remember thinking that this was a very interesting and good place to be, because it was making a deliberate effort to combine theory, research, and practice. One of the other things, in addition to all of these positive substantive dimensions, ICAR was on the verge of becoming a recognized state center of excellence, which I think gave us some sort of credibility and standing down in Richmond. But it was a time of economic constraint. The other thing I remember, which something that economic constraint was to some extent compensated for by a network of very active North Virginian entrepreneurs like Bill and Helen Lynch
absolutely,
and Drew C. Cumbie French and others. I arrived in an environment where there was considerable personal philanthropy for the program, at the same time when there was considerable state concern about the whole nature and purpose of conflict resolution.
A complex time, to say the least. Now, what did you do, Kevin, while you were with ICAR? What was your contribution?
My contribution? What was my contribution? I think I changed the atmospherics a little bit. I think it was probably, you'd had an English and two American directors. I think it was 2 or 3 American directors, 1 English, and then me. So I think I kind of changed the atmospherics a little bit in terms of regional focus and concentration. I was kind of very interested in, and still am interested in, the Asia-Pacific region and how it challenges our field. I was interested in how we could expand. So I was and how our faculty could be consolidated and given sort of a reasonable degree of job security, and that applied particularly to those that were on the clinic side who had no job security and endless short-term contracts. I'm not quite sure what the current situation is, where I hope people aren't on those short-term contracts. So I was always very insistent that wherever possible, the Institute not view its faculty as piece workers who could be hired on a a yearly rate or a semester rate or whatever. So I tried to work to that end. I played an active role with other deans and directors in developing a deans and directors group, which met independently of the provost and the president, so that we could see ways in which we could harmonize our interests across the different institutes in public policy and health and the other ones, and Century College as it was then. So I spent quite a lot of my time on working to build collaborative relationships with the other directors. In addition to that, I mean, I think I continued the ICAR tradition of developing ICAR as a learning community with blurred distinctions between faculty and students, as we all kind of grapple with some of these issues as equals rather than as superiors and inferiors. So I did, we had...
Which I remember very fondly, by the way, and thank you for that.
Yes, yeah, which we had many good social events, which were great. And I think I also kind of worked to try and make sure that the interests of the institute were given a kind of certain priority by the university hierarchy. It was sort of said to me by George Johnson, who was the president when I arrived. Who followed him? I kind of have a Freudian suppression of his successor.
Alan Merton.
Alan Merton. Is Alan just retired?
Who just retired.
Right. Alan Merton was much more of a businessman than George Johnson, who was much more of a visionary. And so I kind of arrived under George Johnson's influence, and he was very excited by ICAR. He kind of, he used to tell me he put his finger to the air and would try and identify sort of social vectors and ride them, and he could see that conflict analysis and peace research was a social vector. And then he also told me that he quite deliberately used this institute to balance out against some of the more right-wing and conservative influences that were existing in the Institute of Public Policy.
Oh, yes.
The one which the kind of Nobel Prize winner was in. Who just passed away, James Buchanan. James Buchanan, that's right.
Center for Public Choice?
Center for Public Choice,
yeah.
And the law school, which were kind of considered to be on the right of the spectrum.
Right.
George told me that he was very much in favor for a balanced university of having somewhere like ICAR, which could be on the left of the spectrum. So I was always very keen to encourage that as a kind of as an aspiration. I was beginning to put on the agenda the issue of whether or not we should develop sort of an undergraduate program, but that was still a long way off. I mean, that was considered as being too much. That was in the too hard basket. So we still continued to be a graduate program, just offering a master's and a PhD. Well, I don't know whether you did, but Michelle and others taught into the New Century College undergraduate.
Right, I did not, but they certainly did.
Yeah. The other thing I think, which I kind of tried to sort of certainly kind of encourage, consistent with the work of some of my predecessors, was to make sure that we kept a foot in a range of international conflicts. So we had those problem-solving workshops on Georgia and Abkhazia and on the and other parts of the Caucasus. I think they were an interesting development and led to a range of different student projects, and indeed kind of a whole new project developed around the Georgian project. So it's always kind of challenging trying to work out what your distinctive contribution was. I like to think that it was...
In fact, we had that delightful woman from Tbilisi State University who eventually became an MP.
Yes, she was a prof of psychology.
Gaguli,
yeah.
Magradzi.
Yeah, that's right. She was with us for a long time. I tried to encourage a range of different visitors. I also tried to make sure that some of the people who were working with us from other departments got more actively involved, like Kevin Averick and Peter Black and others, and sort of pull them on board as sort of slightly closer. In fact, I think I managed to get Kevin coming over from sociology on a
where he still
basis.
He's still with us.
Right.
In a very distinguished capacity.
Right. My own personal aspiration was to enhance the number of staff and faculty, and it looks as though my successors have individually and collectively done that. So I'm
Indeed.
pleased that I started that momentum.
You did. Which leads to the final question, Kevin. When you left us to go to London as Secretary General of International Alert, what did you leave behind?
I think I left behind a kind of a robust student body. I loved all the students. I thought that, they were engaged, they were committed, they had both passion and intelligence, and I think that was good. I think I left behind a faculty that was in pretty good heart. I don't think anybody was demoralized when I left. Some may have been glad to see me go. I mean, I think the university administration was probably very glad to see me go because I was a thorn in the side, but that's okay. I left at a very opportune time because George Bush was just about to be elected, and when I'd spent 1 year in London, I think he was elected, and the notion of coming back under a Bush administration seemed too appalling to contemplate. I was pleased I spent 5 years in London at International Alert because that gave me a good feel for what of our research and theory was useful in conflict situations. I remember asking my West African Great Lakes program manager to kind of tell me what theory he was working on. I wanted him to kind of talk about his theory of change, and I wanted to talk about human needs and whether or not a problem-solving type process would be helpful. And he said to me that he had no time for theory. He'd been in more genocides than you could possibly imagine. He said his role consisted of bringing awkward and difficult people from awkward and difficult, if not impossible, places to places that were less awkward and difficult for awkward and difficult conversations.
Sounds like a theory to me.
So that was. I think ICAR prepared me well for that job at Alert. We had a very robust research section that did a lot of work on women in conflict and Resolution 1325, small arms and light weapons, the role of business in conflict, and so forth. And also programs in West Africa, the Great Lakes, the Caucasus, Nepal, and the Philippines. So it was a good, my time at ICA was good preparation for that. And it also provided a bridge between London and here. A number of your students came over and joined me.
David Bremner
came over and joined me as an intern and managed to pull in a $250,000 grant to work on the Caucasus. £250,000 grant, so it was kind of
very
almost
impressive.
$500,000. Yeah.
And I think he did a PhD at the LSE.
He did a PhD at LSE in the end. Yeah.
Kevin, this leads to one more question, if I may, if you don't mind, with your indulgence. How do you see the future of our multidisciplinary field and of the role of places like ESCAR and your institute in Dunedin?
Yeah, right. Well, first of all, I think that there's a sort of an extraordinarily different environment right now for all of us. When I left ICAR in the late 90s, we really had to make the case for conflict prevention and conflict transformation and conflict resolution as disciplines and as theories and as praxis. But I think that case has long since been made. I spent my time in International Alert sort of focusing attention on sort of how do we develop kind of conflict-sensitive development strategies and getting that development peace-building nexus sorted out. And I think that kind of hurdle has been passed. So for me, the challenge right now is what's the next generation of theory and practice that we want to do? How can we? What sort of practice lies behind, third-party interventions, mediation, problem-solving workshops, negotiations, and so forth. I mean, all of those have their part, but I think there's a kind of a need now to think much more rigorously about what might be called post-foundation, second or even third generation conflict transformation and peace building. What does it involve? What areas do we want to claim? I've just been at a meeting on the role of psychology and social psychology in relation to intractable conflict, I think very often in the past we maybe haven't paid as much attention to some of these deeper social psychological dynamics and drivers of conflict. I think that would be worthwhile. But in terms of the institutional connection and collaboration, I think we should reactivate what used to exist at IPRA, which was a regular biennial meeting of all of the different institutes and organizations around the world for kind of discussions around theory and what joint theory and research and what joint theory and research we might get involved in. It would also, I think, be really helpful if our students were able to kind of meet and spend time in each other's centres. We have a collaborative relationship with Uppsala, for example, for PhD students to come and spend 3 to 6 months at our shop in Dunedin, and we're sending our students to Uppsala. There's absolutely no reason why we shouldn't have more exchanges in the middle of PhD work and dissertation work.
Absolutely.
I think that would be very helpful. And I think it's important for us to kind of focus some more attention on faculty level exchanges. I think the fact that I haven't seen a lot of my colleagues from ICAR, except occasionally at ISA and so forth, is an interesting commentary. Are we so happy in our own little silos that we don't want to kind of reach out? And
hopefully not. But we do want to reach out.
So it's a long answer to the kind of third question or the fourth question, but I think we can do better at collaborating. We should do better at kind of making sure we have both virtual connections across time and space, and that we actually have some regular biennial meetings of either institute director level or even better, a range of scholars and students from all places to kind of share lessons learned, improbable findings, and what praxis and practice is really working in some of the places that we find ourselves in.
I agree, and I would like to work with you on that, making that dream, that option realizable, Kevin. Thank you very much.
Okay, all the best. No, thanks.
Thank you. Cheers.